want to know some like your top three like favorite therapy books, adventure or not adventure therapy related, and some podcasts. Um,
so podcasts. So there's a podcast, therapy podcast. My favorite one is obviously the Very Bad Therapy podcast. Another one there, if you're into therapy-ish podcast, there's one called Shrink Wrap Radio, and that's probably the most other professional, but that's pretty theory-oriented, but that can have really interesting guests. Let me get some books really quick. One second.
And so if you bring Yoda over, I'm closing this.
I'm not going to. Okay, we'll start with macro therapy and then we'll get smaller, all right? First book. That book's very American, never mind. This book, Beyond Best Practice. What's the subheading? How mental health services can be better. This is written by a woman, I'll write it in the chat box, named Birgit Vala from Norway. And so she wrote it in Norwegian, and then David Prescott helped her translate that to English. Birgit she's a psychologist, and she was head of a community-based mental health service in Norway. And she was thinking everything we know about mental health is backwards. We've got all the government telling us what treatment to do when, how to do it, all these sort of things. And so she said, together as a team, we threw out all the manuals. We stopped diagnosing people, and we just measured our outcomes, outcome rating scale, session rating scale at the end, did the feedback-informed treatment. But she said, we just started asking people, how can we help? And that's what they did. They did that for years, 2-3 years, and the government found out. And what they did is they pulled Birgit Vala into like courtrooms. They audited her whole practice. They told her, you cannot practice until this audit is over. And she got dragged through the mud, I think for 2 years, trying to figure this out. The conclusion at the end of the audit was Birgit Vala was to rewrite all the accreditation standards, all the manuals, because her community-based organization outperformed every other community in Norway. And there's a lot of implications for adventure. She talks about taking young people. She has a section called trampoline therapy. She's like, obviously this is a joke, but I had a client who wanted to go on trampolines. So we had trampoline therapy. And so I really look up to her. And she, if you YouTube her name, there's a great interview with her. And then if you also have an hour, there's an amazing keynote she did at a conference. If you just YouTube her name, they're probably the top 2 things that pop up. And in that keynote, she talks about this Norwegian long jumper on the skis. You know how they shoot and like, right? Well, you're graded in ski jumping. This is the metaphor she uses. It's so good. She goes, you were rated in the olden days about how far you went and how good you looked doing it. And people were jumping very straight. So like a stick figure. Their skis would look like this, right? Straight in the air. And then what ended up happening is this one guy came along and he started doing the whole really leaning forward with his skis out. And he started going farther. But all the judges were like, yeah, but it doesn't look good. And so her metaphor is, who cares how it looks? We go further. And now what does everybody look like? How the person changed ski jumping. So with our agencies, it's all about going further, and getting better outcomes has so little to do with adventure therapy and so about your ability to tailor your services to your client's best interests and what they want. So that's a cheap, really great book to read. This is my, yeah, that's boring too. I read a lot of boring crap. That's the problem. I would say start with that. As far as outdoor therapy books, if you have a general knowledge base of the book, I wouldn't recommend. Our book's pretty introductory, but Nevin's book with Dave and Katie is, I think, the most practical book that we have about what sessions look like, those sort of things. I have the adventure therapy book. I don't have the new one, and I don't know. I know what's in the new one. That's a bit different. It's mostly just about research. So if you have the 2012 one, I don't know how much you're going to get out of the new one. Yeah, I guess I think one of the things is figuring out what like, even if you read anything, like let's say you're a psychodynamic worker or cognitive behavioral solution focused, my recommendation would be when you read books is to find out what you need to practice. And practice, I don't mean, by practice, I don't mean just do the work with a client, because that's performing. You know, you don't get better at guitar by playing on stage. It's everything you do when you have no audience. So if I think about something, so introduce, this is a really good thing to do. If you decide to start measuring your outcomes, you download these measures, they're for free. You go to YouTube, you just search outcome rating scale, you can probably find hundreds of videos of people introducing this to their clients. You do not have to do that as a script, right? Also, you're going to have to put your own cultural identity twist onto it. If you're going to introduce that to someone, take your partner, sibling, friend, take a phone or a computer, turn on record and say, I'm going to introduce a measure to you. See how they respond to it. Let them give you feedback. When you're going to do it with a client, ask your client, hey, can I just record this on the phone? Something, I'm not going to record video. I just want to record how I introduce this. I'm just going to listen to it after the session and then I'll delete it. So you're actually doing something out of your session to practice. So if you go solution focused and you want to ask the miracle question, ask if you can just record it asking that question. I want to try something with you. Can I just record it really quick? Just so I can hear it back, because I'm just trying to get better at my job. Most clients, I don't think really mind. As long as they know what you're recording is not going to go out to the, the cloud, I think it'll be fine. So I would say really start with beyond best practice. If you're interested in research angles, there's a book called The Heart and Soul of Change. That book is unbelievable, but it is research heavy and not client experience heavy. It's how therapy works heavy. Yeah, so things like that. You can obviously, if you want to give Will all your money, you can buy Will's book. But if you already have a general idea about outdoor therapy, I don't know what you're going to get out of that. But it's interesting, I guess.